Today, I want to share a story from one of my solo trips that still lingers in my mind. It's not the kind of story I usually tell, but it's one I'll probably never forget. This happened a few years ago when I was traveling alone across northern Italy by train. I hope you'll find it as strange and unsettling as I did, so let me set the scene. I'd been saving up for this trip for a long time, and finally, I was able to take a few weeks off work to explore some of the smaller towns between Milan and Venice. I'd been on the road for about 10 days, moving from one budget guest house to another, carrying everything I needed in a single backpack. It was early January, and the weather was chilly, but not too cold, just enough to make a warm train compartment feel extra cozy. By the time I reached Verona, I was feeling pretty drained. I'd walked miles every day, tried all kinds of new food, and met some interesting people along the way. But after a while, all that moving around starts to catch up with you. So when I booked an overnight train from Verona to Trieste, I was honestly just looking forward to a good night's sleep. I managed to get a small private compartment, which felt like a huge upgrade from the shared rooms I'd been staying in. The train station in Verona was almost empty when I arrived. It was getting late, maybe close to midnight. The platform lights gave everything a soft, yellow glow. I found my carriage, stepped inside, and made my way to my compartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, warm, and private. I tossed my backpack onto the seat and took off my jacket, feeling relieved to finally have some space to myself. As I was settling in, I glanced out the small window in the door. That's when I noticed someone standing at the end of the corridor. It was a man, probably in his late 60s, wearing an old-fashioned coat and a flat cap. He was just standing there, looking in my direction, not moving, not saying anything. I figured he was waiting for someone, or maybe just lost in thought. People watching is pretty common when you travel, so I didn't think much of it at first. I closed the curtain on my door, plugged in my phone, and lay down on the narrow bed. The train started moving a few minutes later, and I felt myself relax. As the gentle rocking set in, I put on some quiet music and tried to let my mind drift. But every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about that man in the corridor. Something about the way he stood there, so still, made me a little uneasy. I told myself I was just tired. After all, when you're traveling alone, it's easy for your imagination to run wild. I tried to shake it off and focus on getting some rest. A couple of hours later, I woke up with a start. I needed to use the restroom, so I grabbed my phone and quietly slid open the compartment door. The hallway was dim, lit only by a few overhead lights. I didn't see anyone around, so I made my way to the bathroom at the end of the carriage. On my way back, I noticed the same man standing in almost the exact same spot as before. This time, he wasn't looking at me. His head was slightly bowed, and his hands hung loosely at his sides. I slowed down, unsure whether to say something or just walk past. I decided to keep my distance and moved along the opposite wall, giving him as much space as possible. As I passed, I caught a faint scent of something old, maybe mothballs or old books. His clothes looked a little out of place, like he'd stepped out of a different decade. He didn't move or acknowledge me, and I hurried back to my compartment, locking the door behind me. Back in my compartment, I sat on the bed and tried to calm down. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I thought about knocking on the door of the next compartment to see if anyone else was awake, but I didn't want to bother anyone over something that was probably nothing. I told myself he was just another passenger, maybe a little confused or just keeping to himself. After all, trains can be disorienting, especially at night. I pulled the curtain tight, lay back down, and tried to get some sleep. But every little sound made me jump, and I kept replaying the scene in my head. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of the train slowing down. Sunlight was peeking through the edges of the curtain, and I could feel the train coming to a stop. I checked my phone just after 6 in the morning. We'd arrived in Trieste. I stretched, gathered my things, and took a deep breath before opening the compartment door. The hallway was empty. I walked down the corridor, glancing at the compartments as I passed. I didn't see the man anywhere. Maybe he'd gotten off at an earlier stop, or maybe he was waiting in another part of the train. As I reached the end of the carriage, I saw the train attendant checking tickets. I stopped and asked, "Excuse me, do you know if the gentleman in the old coat got off already? He was standing in the corridor most of the night." The attendant looked at me, a little puzzled. "Which gentleman?" he asked. I described the man as best I could, his age, his coat, the cap, how he'd been standing in the corridor. The attendant shook his head. "There haven't been any other passengers in this carriage tonight," he said. "You were the only one booked in this section. The other compartments are empty." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to argue, to insist that I'd seen him more than once, but the words just wouldn't come out. The attendant gave me a polite smile and moved on to help someone else. I stepped off the train into the cool morning air, feeling a little dazed. The city was just waking up, and everything felt strangely quiet. I walked to a nearby cafe and ordered a coffee, trying to shake off the feeling that I'd just dreamed the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I remember the way the man stood, the way he didn't move or speak, the odd smell that lingered in the corridor. I can't explain it, and I've never experienced anything like it since. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or maybe my mind was playing games with me after so many days on the road. I've told this story to a few friends since then, and everyone has their own theory. Some say it was a ghost. Others think it was just a tired traveler who slipped away without being noticed. I'm not sure what to believe, but I do know that traveling alone sometimes brings you face to face with things you can't quite explain. This goes back about 5 years, when I was working as a maintenance worker in the metro system of a large European city. I'll just call it Central City for privacy. By then, I'd already been on the job for a couple of years and thought I'd seen just about everything. Late night shifts, empty stations, odd noises, none of it surprised me anymore. But this one night was different. I was assigned to do some cleaning and basic repairs at an older station on the east side of town. It was called Riverbank Station. Usually, this place was packed during the day, but at night, especially after the last train, it became almost completely deserted. That night, it was just me, my cleaning cart, and the steady hum of the old overhead lights. I remember thinking how strange it felt to be in a place that's usually so busy, but now, totally silent. No footsteps, no voices, just the occasional rattle as a train passed through without stopping. I hadn't seen another person for hours. As I was mopping near the edge of the platform, I suddenly heard a sharp, metallic clatter coming from the tunnel. It was loud enough to make me jump and drop my mop. The sound reminded me of a piece of metal hitting the rails, like someone had dropped a wrench or a heavy bolt. I paused and listened, but after a minute or two, nothing else happened. I figured it was probably just a loose bit of concrete, or maybe a rat knocking something over. These stations are old, and things fall apart all the time. I went back to work, but about 10 minutes later, the same sound echoed out from the tunnel, only this time it was even louder. It made me stop in my tracks. I started to feel uneasy, wondering if something was really wrong down there. Two loud bangs like that, so close together, didn't seem normal. I walked over to the tunnel entrance and peered into the darkness, trying to see if anything was out of place. But it was pitch black, and my flashlight didn't reach very far. I thought about calling out, but decided against it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing serious, maybe just old pipes settling or some animal moving around. I tried to focus on finishing my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was almost done when I heard a child's voice coming from the tunnel. It was faint, but clear enough to make out. The voice was calling for help. I froze. I'd never heard anything like that before. My first instinct was to ignore it, thinking maybe I was just tired and hearing things. But the voice called out again, and this time it sounded desperate. I knew I couldn't just walk away if there was a child in trouble. I walked to the edge of the platform and looked down the tracks. I called out, "Are you okay? Where are you?" There was a short pause, then the voice answered, "Yes, I'm here. Please help." I hesitated, but my conscience wouldn't let me ignore it. I climbed down onto the tracks and waited for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. I called out again, asking where exactly the child was. The voice replied, "Just ahead. Keep walking." I started walking slowly along the tracks, my flashlight barely lighting up the tunnel ahead. As I moved forward, I kept asking questions. "What's your name? Are you hurt?" But the only answer I got was, "Just keep walking." Something about the whole situation felt wrong. The voice sounded flat, almost rehearsed. My heart was pounding, but I kept going, telling myself I was just being paranoid as my eyes adjusted. I thought I saw the outline of a small figure up ahead, standing just beyond the reach of my light. But then I noticed something else, a much taller shadow, standing a few steps behind the child. It was so still, I almost missed it. Every instinct I had told me to get out of there. I stopped, turned around as quietly as I could, and started walking back toward the platform. I tried not to make any noise, hoping whoever or whatever was in that tunnel wouldn't follow me. As I climbed back up onto the platform, I heard the child's voice again, louder this time. "Wait, where are you going?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed my phone and ran up the stairs until I had a signal. I called the transit police and told them everything about the noises, the voice, and the shadows in the tunnel. They arrived within minutes and started searching the area. I waited at the top of the stairs, watching as officers with flashlights combed through the tunnel. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers came back holding a single child's sneaker they'd found on the tracks. It was just lying there, with no other sign of anyone around. The police checked their records for any missing children, but nothing matched. They searched the tunnels for hours, but didn't find anyone else. In the end, the only evidence was that lonely shoe. No child, no adult, no explanation. The police said it could have been left behind by someone earlier, or maybe it was just a prank. But I know what I heard and saw that night. I still wonder about it sometimes. Maybe someone was trying to lure me into the tunnel for reasons I don't want to think about. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I don't have any answers, just a strange memory that still makes me uneasy. Working in the subway, you get used to a lot of odd things. But that night at Riverbank Station was different. I've never experienced anything like it since, and I hope I never do again. If any of you have had strange encounters in places like this, I'd be interested to hear your stories in the comments. Thanks for listening, and stay safe out there. I live in a pretty large city. Let's call it Metroville. I use the city's train system to get to and from work every day. Most of the time, the ride is pretty uneventful. You see the usual mix of commuters, students, and sometimes people who just seem a bit out of place. I've learned to just keep to myself, listen to music, and scroll through my phone until I reach my stop. One evening, after a long day at work, I was heading home on the train. It was already pretty late, so the train wasn't packed, but there were still a handful of people in my car. I was sitting by the window, just minding my own business and checking my messages, when I noticed someone a few seats down from me. This person stood out right away. He was dressed head to toe in dark clothes, black jacket, black pants, black shoes, even black gloves. What really caught my attention, though, was that he was wearing a full ski mask and a pair of sunglasses, completely covering his face. I couldn't see any part of his skin, and I had no idea what he looked like underneath. He seemed a bit taller than average and had a solid build, but that was about all I could tell. At first, I didn't think much of it. People wear all sorts of things in the city, and sometimes you just see odd fashion choices. I figured maybe he was just cold or wanted to keep to himself. I went back to my phone and tried not to stare. After a while, the train started to slow down for my stop. I was a little distracted, so I almost missed it. When I realized it was my station, I quickly gathered my things and stood up to head for the doors before they closed. As I got up, I noticed the masked man also rising from his seat just a moment after me. I felt a little uneasy, but I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. Maybe he was getting off at the same stop. I didn't want to overthink it, so I focused on making it out the doors in time. Once I was off the train, I started making my way through the station toward the exit. There were a few other people around, but not many. It was getting late, and the station was pretty quiet. I went up the stairs and out onto the sidewalk, heading in the direction of my apartment. After a minute or two, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the masked man had also left the station and was now walking a short distance behind me. He wasn't right on my heels, but he was definitely following the same path I was taking. At this point, I started to get a little nervous. I know the area well, and I've walked this route hundreds of times, but something about this situation felt off. I kept walking, trying to act natural, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me. I decided to test it out. When I reached the corner where I usually turn, I took my usual route and, sure enough, the man turned as well. He was still about 40 or 50 feet behind me, but he was definitely there. I knew I had to do something. My apartment was only about 5 minutes away, but I didn't want this guy to know where I lived. I remembered there was a small grocery store along the way that stayed open late. I'd been there plenty of times before, and I knew there was a back entrance that led out to a side alley. When I reached the store, I walked inside and headed straight for the back, pretending to browse for a moment. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the masked man enter the store as well. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay calm. I quickly made my way to the back door, slipped through it, and found myself in the alley behind the shop. Once I was out of sight, I broke into a run, heading for the next street over. I didn't stop until I was sure I'd lost him. After that, I took a longer route home, just to be safe. I didn't see the masked man again, and I made it back to my apartment without any more trouble. I locked the door behind me and took a few deep breaths, feeling relieved but also a little shaken. I still don't know why that man was following me. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe he had some bad intentions. I'll never know. What I do know is that I'm glad I trusted my instincts and didn't lead him straight to my front door. Since then, I haven't seen anyone like that on the train, and nothing else strange has happened during my commute. But the whole experience reminded me to always stay aware of my surroundings, especially when traveling alone at night. If you ever feel like someone is following you, don't be afraid to change your route or go somewhere safe, like a shop or a busy area. It's always better to be cautious.